So recorded. Right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to our English Parent Workshop. Very excited to go through English comprehension, spelling, punctuation, and grammar with you. Very lucky to have Louise Swan with us as well, who's going to be guiding you through all the different elements of the English part of the exam. This, of course, is applicable to Kendrick, who will be doing a GL assessment test, the Slough GL, the Buckinghamshire GL, where there'll be a comprehension, and also Reading School for Reading boys. The children will also have a comprehension to tackle. We will incorporate spelling, punctuation, and grammar, also known as SPAG, and that is very much applicable to the GL assessment test as well. So I'm going to share my slides with you, and hopefully you'll all be able to see this okay. Some quite youthful pictures of ourselves there, Louise. I'm not sure we
No,
quite
I
look.
did think that.
I'm
Yes,
not quite sure
so
we look like that anymore. I don't know if we can get
I
away with those pictures for much longer, but I've
don't think
certainly
we
got a
can.
few more grey hairs than I had on that picture. But anyway, uh, I'm going to just introduce this to you in terms of just really highlighting, I guess, the importance of English comprehension skills. Not only, of course, do we cover that at Teachitright, but we also realise, of course, children do English at school within year five. But what we tend to find with certainly things like comprehension, we delve into it in slightly more depth, I would say, that actually are how to approach a comprehension, working under time conditions, how to answer questions, how to refer back to the text. So we know it's done at school. Is that going to be enough to do well within something like the 11 plus? I would say no, that really we do go into more depth with those skills and really build up their confidence around comprehension. We're also quite reliant, I guess, as well, on children being well read. They are prepared to read thoroughly. That's not just fiction, that's non-fiction, that's poetry as well, really to build up their vocabulary. And we are reliant on you as parents being able to encourage that, facilitate that at home. If you find your child is a reluctant reader, are there different ways that you can try and get them into reading? And we'll talk a little bit about that, particularly at the end of the workshop, about encouraging good reading skills. But it does very much, I think, stem from you as parents. If you're willing to read to them, and I still think even children in year five, you can still read to them. They can hopefully still read to you. And actually modeling that reading is really important. We understand that for children to perform well in the GL assessment or Reading Boys English element, they have to have certain skills in regards to English. And that also includes not only being able to read fluently and accurately, but also having a good vocabulary as well. Very often within the comprehension side of the exam, they will ask questions about the vocabulary used in the passage, whether that be synonyms and antonyms for those words, whether they ask them what word groups those words belong to, whether they ask about the literacy devices, things like metaphors and similes. So there's always quite a lot involved with doing well with an English comprehension. We are not surprised when we hear that potentially there could be a classical text used. I must admit, in the last few years, the exam board seemed to have veered a little bit away from classical literature and seemed to be doing more sort of contemporary pieces. Certainly, that's the feedback we've been getting from students. But it's quite a sizable amount of text to read. And then answer a series of questions on. And we'll be looking at some examples with you this afternoon. One of the sessions that I did this afternoon was actually with a group of children who wanted to know a little bit more about how to approach the exam and how to use things like the multiple choice sheet. And we had a long discussion about the fact that because it is a multiple choice test, it is always worth choosing an answer, putting something down. And we will emphasize that as we get nearer the exam as well. So we will be doing a separate session on exam technique, and that will be open to parents and pupils to come along to in the summer term. And we'll talk more about how to use the multiple choice sheet as we go along. So hopefully that just gives you a little bit of a summary about what we're going to be covering and talking about. I'm now going to hand over to Louise. And Louise is going to talk to you a little bit about vocabulary and words that can sort of come up in the question stems.
Hello, everyone. So, yes, I'm going to cover some of the key words that the children need to know. The questions with regard to this vocabulary here that we're doing today often come at the end of a comprehension. And if the children know these, they can often pick up marks quite quickly there. So I often say to them that it's sometimes worthwhile looking at those questions at the end and getting those out of the way and getting some confidence. The words here have been paired with the wrong meaning. So, what would be really good if you could just have a little look at it and perhaps, I don't know, perhaps you can label the meanings one, two, three, and so on, and then see if you can pair up the word with the actual meaning. Just give yourself a minute and have a look and see if you know all the meanings of those words. Got alliteration, homophones, similes, adjectives, onomatopoeia, metaphors, synonyms, verbs, personification, and antonyms. Can you match those with their meanings? So, I don't want to waste too much time, but hopefully you've had a little look at them and been able to identify some of them. Alliteration. Is anyone brave enough to have a go at that? I can't see actually all of the people, Chris, so it's probably just best.
Yeah, that's it. No worries. I've we've got obviously a lovely attendance this afternoon. We've got over 40 parents
Oh,
here,
that's
but they
fabulous.
just sort of
Well,
appear in a long list. So
yeah.
it's
Okay,
probably
so I
easier
won't
to
put
work
anyone on
through
the
them.
spot.
Yeah, yeah.
So, alliteration. Alliteration is when a sound is repeated, like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper. And the sound for alliteration comes at the beginning of the words. Homophones. Homophones are words that sound the same but have a different meaning and sometimes are spelt differently too, like pear and pear. Similes. Similes are a descript when you are describing something, can you say something is like something else? So the moon was like a big balloon in the sky is a simile. Adjectives, of course, describe a noun. Onomatopoeia is a word that sounds like the thing it's describing. So bang or crash. It sounds like that which you're describing, and children love those. Metaphors, describing something and saying that it is something else. So the moon was or is um, a big balloon in the sky. When you're saying it is, it's slightly different to a simile. Synonyms is a word that has the same or nearly the same meaning as another. And a lot of the questions revolve around synonyms. Really important, that one. Loads of words to learn. Verb, sorry, is an action or a doing word. Sometimes can be very noticeable if it's in the past tense and has ed on the ending. Personification is something described with human features. So my favourite is the tree stretched its fingers into the sky, and obviously trees don't have fingers, so we're personifying the tree and giving it the qualities of a person. Antonyms, words that are opposite in meaning. So synonyms and antonyms often go together. Now that involves not only learning what those words mean, what those are, it's also learning lots of words. And the demands from the 11 plus are really high. The vocabulary is very difficult. And it's really important that you are working really hard on them consistently. I said to the children this weekend, because we're going on to maths and non-verbal reasoning now, they can't afford to think, oh, good, I don't need to worry about words. Because by the time you get close to the exam, if you find that you haven't got a big enough vocabulary, it's a bit late to do it. Some people like to use the boxes of words. Those I think can be great fun, But what I do if I'm using those is I give the child the card and I ask them to read the definition to me, and I have to guess the word. And the children really enjoy that because it's you that's on the spot, not them, not them. But of course, while you're doing that, they're holding the card in their hand and reading the definition of that word, reading the word. So it helps with spelling. They're subconsciously looking at the shape of the word and the letters that are there. So it helps with that too. If I can't guess the word, I say, oh, give me the second letter. And if I still can't guess it, oh, give me the third letter. And the children think it's wonderful when I can't get the word. It also gives me a lot of sympathy with the children because I understand how hard it is. I experience it myself and they love to see me struggling. So um, that's a good little tip, I think. These literacy devices that you just looked at, I would recommend, Chris has already mentioned it, reading some poetry because those literary devices are just bursting out of poems. Poetry removes a lot of words that are actually perhaps not necessary for what the poet wants to say, and you're left almost with the pure simile or metaphors, and they're all pushed into one small place. And it's very nice to identify them, particularly nature poems. So I would recommend to make sure that you read some poetry together with your child and see if they can identify some of those things. So, quick fire test. So, which of the following is the best definition for the word malice? Now, the first thing I always say to the children is don't panic. Don't panic when that happens. Often, the comprehension question will give you a line reference. And I always say to the children, why is that line reference there? They're trying to help you. Go back to the text, put your options in the text and see if that helps you at all to know what the word is if you don't know. The other really important strategy is to use elimination. You can see that the writers of this question are having a little bit of fun because the spelling of malice has lice in. So we've got a type of head lice or a type of injury. Elimination really helps the children to get rid of those. And now there's a 1 in 3 chance of getting it correctly if you don't know what malice is instead of a 1 in 2. The context of the question in the comprehension, I hope, would help you with a look of confusion. If the reader is thinking, oh, yeah, you would be confused there, then you might choose malice. And the same with a desire to succeed. They can then go back to the text and try and use the text. And lots of children forget to do that. Of course, it is C, a desire to harm someone. But it's the text that will give the children the clue. But I do recommend elimination.
Lou, can I just pause you just a moment? Just because obviously in the chat, some people are answering them and having a go at them, which is great, and there may be some children looming in the background as well. But we've had an interesting question from one of our parents just around how to support people that are not necessarily native speakers. And I was just wondering whether you could just spend a few minutes just talking about that in terms of vocabulary. And around sort of literacy devices. What's your thoughts on that if English is not necessarily your first language?
Well, I think what I always do, whoever it is, when I'm learning, I'm doing vocabulary, is I put the word into a situation that the children can relate to. So my favourite example is the word stubborn. If I'm talking about the word stubborn, rather than give a definition and say, as the dictionary would, I would give the children a story. So my story would be, have you ever been in the supermarket and seen a mother with a toddler and the toddler's running around the supermarket and the mother tries to get the toddler and put the toddler in the pram and the toddler goes rigid, absolutely straight and will not bend in the middle and will not get into the pushchair. And the children are, yeah, I've seen that. Or my cousin does that, or my brother or sister does that. And I say, well, that child is being stubborn. They won't do what they're supposed to do. And that story is what they can keep in their mind the next time we're doing vocabulary. If I say, what does stubborn mean? And they've forgotten, I say, baby in a pushchair, and they immediately are then able to give me a definition. So I'm a real believer in stories in order to carry the vocabulary, because that's how we learn. That's why reading is so important. When you're reading, the words are in context. So as you're enjoying the story, you are learning that vocabulary without even knowing you're doing it. But I think the story strategy for me works for everybody, but particularly if the situation, if it can be put in a situation of a language and a culture that, another language, another culture, it's really helpful.
Thanks, Lou. And I will just mention at this point about, I know it comes up sort of every year, but I do emphasise the BBC Bite Size website, only because if you come across a word, and just going back to when Lou was sort of marrying those up, right, metaphors, I need more examples of those, or I need to understand exactly what a metaphor is. If you go onto the BBC Bite Size website, and type in metaphors, there are often really good examples that will help your child remember those kind of those terms. And just really following on from what Lou said, I suppose it's trying to find those really good examples that help you remember it. If I was to talk about alliterations, my alliteration that I always think about, because I know my mum used to try and get me to do it as a tongue twister, she sells seashells on the seashore. And it's those kind of things that will just stick in your mind. And I do find, Lou, and I'm sure we have parents here who probably may third, possibly fourth time of coming to one of these workshops with English. We do often say the same examples, don't we?
Yes, we
Because
do.
those are the ones for us that have become memorable and stuck in our heads. I mean,
Yes.
I've heard you mention that one before about stubborn. That, yeah, it's a brilliant example, because you definitely think of those kids in the pushchair being stubborn and not wanting to go in. So everyday examples, I think, is probably the key part to that. So hopefully, and again, person asking that in the in the chat has been very honest and said that they feel their English is worse than their children's. So
Uh, Actually, going back to that, Chris, I think it would be really good in that situation to explain to the child, if the child is also multilingual, explain to your child in that other language what the word stubborn would mean.
yeah,
Let them get the picture, let them get the story in their own language. I see no problem with that at all. In fact, I think it's great.
yeah,
And
definitely.
and then you could say to your child, could you now explain to me in English what stubborn means? And children love to think that they're actually doing something that you find difficult, and they're doing that for you. And it will really make the words stick in their head. So turn what you feel as your disadvantage into your advantage. Use your the fact that you're bilingual to do that. Okay, shall we go on to the next one? So there's a nice bit of alliteration there. Saucy Susie, and is it drank, sipped, or gargled soda slowly? And obviously that's alliteration. We're looking for sipped. What type of word is wildly? Now, it is adverb, and adverbs are often noticeable by the ly ending, but not always. If we said he kicked the football hard, hard would be the word you're looking for, but it hasn't got ly. So I do tell the children, just be very careful of it. But it's really important that they know what these words are: nouns, preposition, verbs, adjectives. A nice way of doing that is just to write a few simple sentences, starting with, say, I jumped, and asking what jumped is, and then extend it to I jumped high. Okay, what's that then? What have we added? What sort of word have we added? And just extend your sentence by adding different types of words and seeing if your child can identify. It's a 2-minute job, and that's quite fun as well. What tense is the word refused? Again, the ed ending is a really good clue. Often words end in ed, but not always. So that also has to be careful.
Thanks, Lou. We obviously had the word against there, didn't we, as well as a preposition,
Yeah.
which again, I think, again, it's one of those ones where children sometimes forget what a preposition is. They even with nouns, I tend to find it's worth going through all your different types of nouns, your proper nouns, your abstract nouns, your concrete nouns, just making sure your child knows those as well.
Yeah.
This is really down to having that prior knowledge before you go into the test. I often talk about with children, you're not going to have a glossary in the back where you can just go and check, oh, what's an adverb, what's an adjective. It is
Yes.
something you have to know before you go into the exam, and that little bit of revision, certainly around literacy devices and things like that, will really stand your child in good stead. So make sure you go through all those kind of keywords with your child as well.
And I
Um,
do agree, Chris. I think the recommendation you made about bite size.
yeah,
I like even the fact that it's called bite size. What I think I would do is they're about what 5 minutes at the very most, and they're
yeah.
little cartoons almost. I would just do one every day. Don't try and do too much. Three different types. Think, oh, I'll do prepositions and adverbs and adjectives tonight because the children just come out confused. Do one, just one for 5 minutes, maybe watch it twice, maybe have a little chat about it and done. And then come back to that again 3 weeks later and see how much they've remembered. But little and often is much more effective than trying to do loads.
No, thank you. We'll just go on now just to talk a little bit more about comprehension and how to tackle a comprehension, some things to also consider when you're reading the text. I think the thing I've noticed with children in particularly in year five is that their reading skills tend to be quite strong. They are generally good readers. What we're also testing, though, is not only how good they are at reading, but also how good they are at comprehending. How much do they actually understand what they've read? And sometimes I find, particularly with children that use sort of good expression when they're reading, they tend to understand a lot more. And I would encourage that as well. I had a lovely conversation with one of my colleagues the other day, and we were actually talking about how beneficial it is in the classroom setting to actually have children reading out a paragraph each or reading it out loud. Obviously, in the exam, they don't get that opportunity. They have to read it in their heads. So that is also something that children need to practice. That's why we vary that approach in the classroom. We don't always get kids to read out loud. Sometimes we'll say, right, you're going to read that passage yourselves and try and understand what you've read. So there's a sort of a balance, I guess. We know in the exam they're not allowed to read it out loud, obviously, but also just to build up their reading and their expression, their understanding, actually reading out loud is a lovely thing for children to be able to do. We do know that text marking is something that children can do to help them. But the problem sometimes when you say to a child, underline what's important, is they underline absolutely everything. So we have to teach the children the kind of things that they should maybe pick out, whether that's statistics, whether that's a key emotion that's linked to that character. So it's a fine line between underlining things, but what do I actually underline? But they can do that in the exam, in their comprehension, if they want to pick things out that are important. They don't have time to be writing vigorous notes down the side, like you might have done when you were doing your GCSEs. But they certainly can pick out things that they think, oh, yeah, I might be asked that. That might be a question that they ask me. I think also kind of training our pupils as well to internalize that information. We do it as adults, I feel, when we read something, particularly when I read emails and things, I think, oh, I'm going to need to read that again because I didn't quite get what that person was asking or what that person was telling me. So I think as children, they should be encouraged to do that as well. It's kind of take a pause. What was it? What was it telling me? Do I understand what's happening in this story or understand the information I'm given about volcanoes or whatever it might be? So just taking that time. And that's why I think when you're working with your child at home, when they are reading stories, ask them about, oh, why did the character do that? Or what's going to happen next? Or make some predictions because it gets them thinking, oh, right, yeah, what is going to happen next in the story? It makes it more fun sometimes. You're not going to always ask them to, summarize what they've read, but sometimes that opportunity to describe what they've read allows you to understand, have they actually understood what they're reading? And that I do find is one of the biggest sort of problems we have sometimes with pupils doing comprehensions in the 11 plus is, are they really going to digest what they've read? Having time within the exam to go back to more complex paragraphs is also something which is sort of open to debate, I suppose. Time is not on their side. I know parents that have said to me before that they think their child should go and look at the questions before they start reading. I don't think that's a very good idea because I think they will run out of time. If they spend all their time looking at the questions before they start going to the text, time is just going to run out. So, from our perspective, we feel that children should read the passage first and then go on to the questions. Now, what they are allowed to do, of course, is come back, sweep the text, scan the text for their answers, looking also for key words that come out in the question stem is a key aspect to that as well. The more comprehension children can do, I think naturally the better they are going to find it and the easier it gets. Now, where can you get comprehensions from? I do hope you are accessing the CGP online. That's a really good place to find comprehension exercises under the English. Obviously, we set that for homework as well, but hopefully you're now, particularly with only, I worked out earlier, about 5 months away, aren't we really, to actually build up their comprehension skills. And also, there are some really nice practice ones, particularly if you're going for GL assessment, but I'd also say Reading Boys can utilise these as well. These ones are on the GL assessment website, the familiarisation booklets. This one is about, it's called The Secret Garden. You may have come across that book before. You may have read it as a child. But this is a sort of typical type of length. So you can see there about 62 lines altogether. So it's quite a lot to read. And I noticed before, and I see this so often in mock exams, where children are still reading when they should be on to the questions. And that's about reading speed. And the only way to improve that, I'm afraid, parents, and there's no magical solution to this, but it's reading more. The more you read, the quicker your pace goes. Now, you can judge your child's reading by going onto websites and looking at how many minutes, how many words per minute they do. But it's not always about that. And as I said earlier, it is also about what they understand. But we do need them reading at a good pace because otherwise they'll never get to the questions and they're not going to get their marks. So that's something you might want to just look into just to make sure they're reading at a good speed. Lou, is there anything else to mention around
Yeah, one or two
reading?
things.
Yeah.
Obviously, everything you've said, I would totally concur, but just a few things to say in a different way. When I start with either year four or year five, I read a passage to them. And I read it without any expression in my voice. I ignore the punctuation. I deliberately put the rise the start of the sentence in the wrong place. And I read in such a way that it's totally understandable, but I've read the words and they can follow me reading the words. And then when I finish, I say, "Did you understand any of that?" And they just look at me and say, "No." And I said, "But I've read it, but I haven't really read it because that's what I call blah blah reading." And they think it's quite funny. So the idea of blah blah reading sticks in their head. And I tell them then that really to be a good reader, you have to read the words, but you have to also be, as well as the reader, you're the listener. At the moment, I'm speaking and people are listening, so you're only doing one thing. But when you're reading and you're doing a comprehension, you're being the reader, you're being the listener, you're having to listen to yourself, you're having to think about what you're actually reading. And then finally, you've got to try and remember as much as you can so that you don't have to go to the text for every single question. So you're doing four things: reading, listening, thinking, and remembering. And every time I do a comprehension, I remind them of that. It's really, really important. But the quickest way to remind them is to say, don't do blah, blah reading. I always tell them that they have one chance really to read it thoroughly, and it's better to read it once really well than to skim read it twice. Always tell them to be extra careful at the beginning. Read the first sentence perhaps twice so that you can tune in, like almost like when you're listening to a radio and you have to tune in. So a lot of comprehensions, ask a question about the first two sentences because they know children haven't tuned in. So be really careful at the beginning and go back and read the first couple of sentences. If you think I've read those two sentences, I don't know what they said. That's the time to tune in at the beginning. I also ask them to imagine if it's fiction, imagine it as if it was a film in their head. Imagine what's happening. So in that remembering bit, they can remember a bit better because they've almost followed it like they're looking at a screen. And I think those things are really, really important. Don't worry. Sometimes when they're reading it for the first time, they see words that they don't understand and they panic. Often words are put into a comprehension and no question is ever asked about them. They're put there to make the children panic in the same way that in maths they'll put a tricky question right in the middle to get some children to panic. So don't worry about words that you don't understand unless you're asked to a question about them. And also, finally, to read much slower than you would if you're reading in your head. What the children tend to do is read at the pace they read in their head. And as Chris said, you can actually tell if you listen to them read, you can tell whether they're reading or not, because if you especially have given them a text that's got quite a lot of quite a long sentence in, you'll find they'll get halfway through the sentence and then stumble because they've lost track of what they were saying. So listening to your child read out loud is really, really helpful. And for you to read out loud to them and show them the pace that is necessary, you'll sort of find out that yourself by doing it. You'll realise that it's definitely slower, but you only have that one chance. So we're going to think now, I think, about inference questions. And
Oh, Lou, sorry,
inference,
just before we do we will do the inference, but I think we're just going to have a look first of all at the Concord
yeah,
passage, and then yeah, we'll get into inference. Can I just pause at this moment and just try and answer a couple of the questions orally that we've had in the chat? So someone's saying, are you doing that in class, teaching them one of these concepts or the way of approaching it? Absolutely. I mean, I think for all of us as practitioners or teachers, then yes, we will cover that. I plan the lessons and have done ever since I sort of founded the company. But within the lesson plans, not that our teachers need this, but there are always little reminders about the approach they need to take or the strategy or skill that they're teaching. So we do go into sort of very much the fine detail of making sure that everything is covered. But I think the approach is certainly also very standard across the lessons, because that's really what we've emphasised as the important way of doing it. I guess as time goes on, it also evolves a little bit as well, and we come across other approaches that could possibly work. Just to Daya's point about do you advise reading the questions first? The
no.
answer to that is no, and I think I may have just pointed that out earlier, that we just think that's a bit of a waste of time, that you haven't got time to do that. You've got to get straight into the reading. You've also asked a very sensible question as well, which was for GL, would they only use one text? No, they might possibly have two short passages with questions that follow each, or it might just be one big chunk of text and then the questions. I know and I've heard of that happening within GL and also Reading Boys as well. So no, they could split the text up. They could do it pretty much how they want. One year I know they did a text, questions, a poem, and then a set of questions. So it really could, it could be laid out in any way. All we know is they are going to have to read something and answer questions. That's for certain. I don't know how much time we want to spend on this, but I just thought it's worth sort of going through an example here of a comprehension, which is all about Concord. I personally found this one quite interesting, actually, about Concord and about the journey that Concord went on, and unfortunately, then sort of to its demise, really, that it was too costly to run. But this passage here, just looking at it, you can see there are quite a few numbers there. And what we tend to find with non-fiction, there are often statistics that are used. I'm just going to underline, I'm sure you can all see this, but just quite a few dates, quite a few references to time, to speed here. And it happens sort of all the way down. It's not only just with the digits, it's also in written as words as well. When we get down here, it talks about how many of the how many Concords were actually built. So just looking at that now, you can see there's a number of statistics that are used. And what we do know is sometimes children are required to do a bit of maths within English comprehension. So I'm just going to read the first sentence to you. It says, despite being retired from the skies in 2003, after 20 years of commercial flights, Concorde is still famous today for its supersonic speeds. And first question says, when did commercial Concorde flights begin? Now, it doesn't say exactly when that happened, but if we go back, we'll notice that they were retired in 2003 after 27 years. So we are going to have to subtract 27 years from 2003. So if we go back to the answer options, the answer, of course, is 1976. So I just thought it was quite a useful example to look at in terms of how maths can enter into a comprehension quite easily, whether they give dates, but it is a case that they have to work something out. It's not just retrieval. We don't find now with many 11 plus questions in the comprehension, it's just a case of extracting the answer. Children have to read between the lines, and this sort of sets up quite nicely for what Lou will be doing in a minute when she's talking about inference with you. I had put in various other questions. I think it's also worth maybe going to the last question here where it says, according to the text, and that's such a key phrase in the 11 plus, not what they may think or what the child may think, but what does it say in the text? Cause Concorde to be removed from service. Now you have to read between the lines because down the bottom here, hope you can all see this on your screen, it says, after its retirement, which was brought about due to a combination of low passenger numbers and spiralling maintenance costs, that indicates to us if they had low passenger numbers, they're obviously not getting any revenue. And if they have a lot of maintenance costs, it's going to be expensive to run. So the answer to that one was D. And again, it's all about what a child can understand from what they read. What can they glean? What can they put into the right context? You'll also notice we go back to this comprehension, and I know Lou mentioned it earlier, but I'll just highlight it again. That need to go back to the relevant line reference. They do often give line references in their comprehension, and it allows children to go back to the right place to find out how a word is used or what context that text is in. So again, encouraging children to go back and look through the text. So often we find children will read something and they'll try and retain what they've read. How difficult that would be in a comprehension like this. You're not going to remember the dates. You're not going to remember necessarily how long something lasted for. But children do, unfortunately. They'll go to the questions and it is a case of guessing. They're not actually going back to the text and reinforcing what they think. I think that's probably enough on that, Lou, to be honest, because I know we've got a lot of spelling, punctuation, and grammar to talk about at some point. But can I get you to talk a little bit more about the inference side of
Yes.
things?
Inference is when the author doesn't actually specifically tell you something, it's suggested. So the example I like to use is if I said, I got up one morning, looked out of the window, came downstairs, had my breakfast, said goodbye to my mum, put my Wellingtons on, put my raincoat, picked up my umbrella, and off I went to school. If the question was, what do you think the weather was like that today? Nothing has been said in the text to tell you what the weather was, but it has been inferred by the fact that I picked up my raincoat, my Wellingtons, and my umbrella. And that's the example I always give to the children, that evidence is there, but not the exact answer. And inference questions are the hardest questions of all. I love it when I come across them in writing, because inference is one of the very special ways that writers engage the reader and make you join in with the story. They actually make you do a little bit of work, but that puts you in a situation where you're almost involved in the text. You're having to really think about it. Before I forget, there is a very nice book, and I can't remember what who publishes the book. I will have a look. It might be a USB. I don't know whether you've seen it, Chris, but it has very short comprehension texts that are designed to have lots of inference in it. And I find those really, really good. So we'll perhaps put that up later.
Yeah, I know we've also got inference cards, Lou, haven't we, in a
Yes.
box. I don't know, Teaching Resources, I think, are the company that sell. I'll again have a look, see if I can put a link
Yeah.
in the chat. But you're right. It's very short, but again, just testing children's inference
Yeah,
skills. And it's such a key aspect of doing well, isn't it, in that comprehension that they can
it is.
infer. Yeah, brilliant.
So looking at the screen, here's another very lovely example. The following sentences: Walker received a funny email from his friend Lily. Which of the following sentences goes back best with the statement? A, Walker will write back to Lily, and B, Walker will buy something on the internet. The answer is A, because B, of course, where it says, although Walter could buy something while he's on the internet, there's nothing in that sentence that suggests he will. It's possible, but there's nothing to suggest it. Whereas most people respond to emails from friends. I know, because that's what my friends and I do. And since the email from Lily was funny, Walter will probably mention something about that when he answers her. So the inference is that Walker will write back. And it is, as I say, I really like the way it engages the reader. It makes you involved, makes you think. So here's a nice passage. In 1829, Daniel Webster started a page program in the United States Senate. The pages are young people who work for the senators. For example, pages run errands and deliver messages. Pages are chosen by the senators of their home states. They must be 16 years old, have good grades, and show leadership qualities. Pages live near the Capitol building and attend school. They're excused from homework when the senators work overtime. Pages get paid, but the biggest reward is the experience of working in the Senate. So the task is to circle the correct statement to show if it's in fact, if it's fact or inference. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to jot down those 4 answers, because I think it's really good practice to have a go at those yourself. Look for the evidence in the text. So that's all you're getting, I'm afraid. Hard taskmaster today. First one, pages run errands for senators. I wonder if anyone can see evidence for that. Pages run errands. Line 3, it's actually, and between 2 and 3, for example, pages run errands. So that one is inference. Pages, sorry, that's fact. We're given the fact. Second one, pages are interested in government. I can't see anywhere where that is said. So that one is inference. Next one, pages go to school. On line 4, they must be 16 years old and have good grades and show leadership qualities. Pages live near the Capitol building and attend school. So that one is fact. And finally, it's an honour to be a Senate page. I'm sure it is from reading the text, but it never actually says that. So that's inference. Hope you got them all right.
Thanks, Lou. We've got another one actually, haven't we? Which I
Yes, we
know
have.
has well generated quite a bit of debate
It
over
has.
the years, hasn't it? This one, I'll leave you to go through this, and it's been a bit of a fad. I assume it still exists, these walking buses, but yeah, perhaps parents would just like to have a read themselves, and then we'll have a go at thinking about the full statements afterwards.
Okay, possibly long enough, I think. So, first one, walking school buses provide good exercise. Now, I have said that that is inference because it does say that they get fresh air, reduces pollution. It tells you lots of things, but I can't find anywhere where it actually says that it's good exercise. But of course, we can infer it. We know that walking is good for us. We know that exercise is good, and that's what they're doing if they're walking to school. Second one, two adults usually accompany a large group. I would say that that is fact. It actually says the driver of the bus is often a parent, and if the group's large, there's another adult who acts as the conductor and walks to the rear of the group. So that's definitely fact. Slow walkers could cause problems for a group. I would say that that's inference. Again, we can presume that if you're at the front and you're marching ahead, and then you've got little ones at the back who can't quite keep up or don't want to keep quite up, it's going to cause problems. So that I would say is correct from inference. Walking buses aren't much fun in bad weather. Again, there is no bad weather work really suggested. So I would say that is inference. I wonder if you agree. Chris, do you still agree?
I think so, Lou. It's one of
Yeah.
those, yeah. I think even on that first one, walking school buses provide good exercise. It does depend also how far away you
Yes.
actually are when you join that bus.
Yes.
You might be very close to the school gates,
Mine
and
used to
actually
join it at the school gate,
it
I'm
doesn't
afraid.
doesn't doesn't do you any good at all. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think being able just to yeah be able to infer is a key skill, and probably one that children do find one of the most hardest things within year five to be able to do. That can be based on not having necessarily enough subject knowledge, or just finding it difficult to read between the lines, and that's really what inference is all about. So thanks, Lou, for going through those examples with everybody. And thank you, I presume it's children, having a go in the chat and doing very well on those. I know I did say that there is maybe a bit of a shift from classical literature now, but this is one, isn't it, Lou, that we've gone into detail a little bit with parents
Yes.
about how to approach the adventures of Tom Sawyer. Uh, I think one of the things we wanted to emphasize with this particular passage was that how the questions don't always tally with the question number. So, question one doesn't
Yes.
necessarily have to be in paragraph one. And I think that's important to note that one of the reasons we don't get children to read a paragraph and then answer a question, read a paragraph, answer a question, it doesn't always logically go like that anymore. So I think maybe exam writers have become a little bit more savvy to that.
I
Is
always try to talk to the children about that, and I say to them very clearly that the way they do a comprehension in class will differ in some ways to the way they do it for the 11 plus, because they are being taught to do it differently often in class, and it's very confusing for them when one teacher's saying one thing and one teacher's saying the other. But once you explain to them that it's two different situations, and those situations need a different approach. The children are really good at understanding that. I caught someone recently starting to read by reading the first question and going to the text, then reading the second section and going to the text. And he got really in a mess, and he almost needed that experience to understand that it wasn't going to work for him, because he felt that he knew how to do it. So it's almost asking them to unlearn something just for the purposes of this exam. But the children are very good. They get the idea.
Thanks, Lou. I think probably what we'll do, we will provide these slides. Someone did ask about that earlier on, so don't worry, we'll send these out to you. I'm sorry we've not sent it out in a booklet, but we've actually made some alterations to it. So we'll send out the slides, I think, to you as a PDF, so at least you can have a look through. I think
I'm wondering with this comprehension that if it would be a really good idea to ask you as parents to read it in your head, as we asked the children to do, and to think of those 4 things that I asked the children to do. To be the reader, I want you to read it, to listen to yourself reading it, to think about it and try to make pictures in your head of what's actually happening, and to remember as much as you possibly can. What I'd like to do is read it in my head. I do this with the children. I say, once I've demonstrated a lot the type of speed that is required, I read at the speed I think I could do that task that I'm asking, that I can listen, make the pictures, remember. And then I say, right, I finish now. And it gives the children a chance of understanding whether they're going too fast or too slow. If they're going too slow, I say that's fine, because by practicing more and more reading, you will get faster. But the way to improve reading and to get the kind of reading that's necessary is not to read lots of stuff quickly. The children think if I read lots of books and read them really quickly, I'll get really good at reading. It doesn't work like that. It's taking a challenging book or passage and reading it slowly is the way that you improve your reading. So shall we have a go at that? I'll read it in my head at the speed I would think would be a good speed to be able to do those 4 actions. And if you all read it in your head as well and just sort of see where you get to. Off we go. And that's me done. So I'm quite an experienced reader, and I would need to read it at about that speed in order to do all the things I asked for, to be able to listen to myself, to put the expression in. I wonder if you think back, did you put the expression in? To use the punctuation to allow me to put the correct expression in, to think about what's happening in the text, and to make it almost a film in my head so that I can sort of go back to that film that I've created from the text when I'm answering questions. So I hope that was helpful. Chris, next slide. Oh, Chris? Chris? Can any parent hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I think we've lost Chris. Okay, he's probably tuned out doing something else. Right, so we need to look now. I can't get the next picture on the screen. That's my problem. Okay, let's try Chris again. Chris? No? Okay. So I hope that you did get the idea of what I'm trying to get the children to do, because it all comes from that reading. Also, the reading of the questions in the test this week that I was marking, I found that a lot of children had not read the questions properly. They had not used the same skills, good reading skills, on the reading of the questions than they did as they did on the text. So it's really important to do that. Oh, great. We've got some questions now. So below are some typical questions linked to the passage. So I think I'll read the questions one by one, or let you read the questions one by one. Have a think about it, and then we'll go to the answer one by one. So below are some typical questions linked to the passage. I would really remind the children every time they do a comprehension to use elimination. It's a really important strategy, and you can make your chances. If you have to guess in the end, if you've got a 1 out of 2, a 1 out of 2 situation, it's much better than having a 1 out of 5 or a 1 out of 4. So elimination is really crucial. Tom wasn't able to move about at 10 o'clock because A, his nerves were on edge. B, he was afraid of waking Sid. C, he had been forbidden to toss and fidget. D, he was in despair. And E, he needed to wake Sid. Now, if we can go back to the text, the question is, the answer to that text is, got the questions, Chris? The answer is B. The text said that he was afraid of waking Sid. And I think we have, where is it? I'll get it at the end, all the questions marked. 2, in the passage, perceptible means. This might really throw a child. What does perceptible mean? It hasn't given a line reference, but if I were with the children, I would go back to where the word perceptible is and try not to be scared of it. The text says little, scarcely perceptible noises. So I would say, have you heard of a word that's similar to perceptive, like perceive? And do you know what perceive means? Have you heard it? Has somebody maybe said, I don't perceive a problem? And will that help you if you take that back to the text? A little scarcely perceivable noises began to emphasize themselves. So if we go back now to the options, easy to see. It talks about hearing, so it's not about seeing, so I eliminate A. Perceptible is not going to mean perceptive because it's a different use of the same word. Recognizable. Did I recognize the sounds? That's possible. Palpable, perhaps. I might not know. Observable. He's not looking. It's quite dark. So I eliminated to get 1 out of 2, and I'm going to have a guess, and it is recognizable. Okay. Next one. Tom thought that there were spirits abroad because A, small sounds made him think of ghosts. B, he had seen a ghost. I'd eliminate that one. There was no evidence of him seeing a ghost. He had heard stories of ghosts in other countries. There's no mention of that in the text. A bottle of spirits had been left on the table. This is the writer being playful, I think, but there's no mention of that. And E, Aunt Polly was drunk. No mention of all those. By elimination, we've got the answer. So important to eliminate. 4, in the passage, muffled means. Now, obviously, if they know what muffled means, that's really good. But if not, go back to the text, find it. Eliminate any words that you already know. So we have muffled means
Sorry, Lou.
Monday.
Can we
Yeah.
do 4 when
Oh,
the
if I missed
clock
one out,
chimed
sorry.
11? That's all right. When the
Okay.
clock chimed
Sorry.
11.
Sorry, when the clock chimed 11. Sorry, I missed that one out. So, A, Tom was still awake. No, he wasn't at 11. I think if you go back to the text, he was half awake. There we go. Ticking of the clock began to bring itself into notice. Old beams cracking me, the stairs creaked. A muffled snore issued from Aunt Polly's chamber. So this muffling is describing a snore. Aunt Polly's snore. Oh, hang on, sorry, I've gone back to the muffling. When the clock timed 11, Tom was still awake. No. Sid was awake? No. Sid was asleep. It was the beginning of eternity. No, nobody's mentioned eternity. Tom was caterwauling. No, he wasn't making any noise. So Tom was sleeping lightly. It actually says that there are clues which we can see there. Where is it? It says at 11 somewhere. I can't see it now. It's too small, I'm afraid. He heard the clock strike 10, and I think he hears it. There we go. I knew he'd heard 11. The clock struck 11, but he did not hear it.
Yeah, it just talks about him. He began to doze there, doesn't it,
Yes,
Lou?
that's
Yeah.
it. Right, and then muffled. We wouldn't want amplified. They might be able to think about that an amp makes the noise bigger and eliminate from that. Mundane, not sure if they'd know that or not. Mutter, I think they know that would be the case, that know what that mean, and that wouldn't fit. So we'd be down to muted and droned. And the answer is muted. So 6, the person who cried, "Scat, you devil," was Tom. No, not Tom. Sid was asleep. So not Sid. Aunt Polly. No, she was asleep. A drunkard? No, there's no drunkards in there that we're told of. A neighbour. It says that somebody opened the door and opened the window and shouted. So there's an inference. We can infer that it was the neighbour. Scat,
Yeah.
you devil, the neighbouring window. There we go.
Thanks, Lou. What we've done on the next few slides, and again, we'll send this to you, but was just to show you
That's it.
where those different answers have sort of come from. And it is very much a splattering of where you've got to go. And yeah, there is no logic, as I was talking about earlier, about sort of paragraph 1, question 1. It doesn't quite work like that. So there's just again, there's a few more questions. And
7
again,
was
we'll
very
send those to you.
difficult. Very difficult. There were 2 howls in the night. One was a dog, the other was A, the dog next door, B, a wolf, C, an echo, D, another dog's distant response, and E, the dog who first howled, now locked up. It could, I think, have been an echo. And I eliminated down to C and D. But what really decided in me in the end was it said that something answered his call. And I think the word answered suggests that it came from another creature rather than was just an echo. But that was an extremely difficult one. But again, elimination would have got you a 1 out of 2 chance.
Lou, thanks very much for going through that. As I say, I think even practicing comprehension with classical text has got huge benefit. Whether they use classical literature or not, the vocabulary you're gaining from, tackling comprehensions like that, I think is invaluable.
And it's not just the vocabulary, it is the use of punctuation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
length of the sentences, understanding how the sentences work is really, really important. If I suggested no other book, I would suggest Wind in the Willows for that reason, quality of the sentences.
I'm going to focus now on spag. I'm going to start off by just talking to you about spelling, and then I'm very, very much delegated the punctuation to Louise. Louise will be able to talk to you a bit more about punctuation marks and etc. And then we'll also have a brief look at the grammar as well. If you did arrive a little bit later, I know I admitted a few people later into the call, just to say we will be doing a separate one on creative writing. And also, I think we'll probably incorporate within that critical thinking a little bit as well, because that seems to be entering the fray for Reading boys. But there was really wasn't time to go through writing as well today. So that's the reason we've sort of separated it out. But please do come along to the creative writing one. I know Lou's got loads of tips and tricks about how to develop writing skills and improve creative writing. So please do join us for that. And I'm sure that will also help any child who is potentially going for any independent schools, because they often have a written task. I think it is important to say, of course, for GL assessment, and it was asked in the chat earlier, are they all multiple choice questions? And yes, they are. There's no written answer for anything. They're all multiple choice, whether that be Kendrick, Slough, or Buckinghamshire. Okay, I'm going to just show you to start with what a spelling exercise looks like if you're not familiar with it. We've practiced this to length within our course. I think it's really important that children are competent spellers. It is slightly different than your conventional spelling test. Even though we do spelling tests weekly with our pupils, they really have to identify a spelling mistake. But you can't identify a spelling mistake unless you know how to spell the word. So I suppose they do sort of go hand in hand. Um, One of the things which is not on the question sheet, but it would be on the multiple choice sheet, is the ends. And the ends indicate that there is no spelling mistake at all. I had a lovely chat with a student the other day, and we were talking about how many ends could there be in a section, and it sort of generated quite a bit of a discussion around the fact, well, if I've got 7 questions, I'm definitely not going to have 3 or 4 ends. That's just not going to happen because they're not really testing you on anything. All they're testing you on is the fact that there's not a spelling mistake. We also then got into well, I'm not going to say an argument, but it was certainly a little bit of a debate around, could you possibly have 2 ends together? And again, I didn't want to rule it out completely, but I said it's probably unlikely because, again, they're trying to test your spelling knowledge. Spellings often within the 11 plus relate to themed words. What I mean by that is they will look at words that have a certain ending, for example, a certain suffix, things like tion, sion. Do children know the difference? ible, able. Uh, ship and meant is also another very common one. Words with double consonants is also something they love to test. Children thinking about prefixes, things like dis. Is it dis or is it des, for example? And one of the reasons we theme our words at Teachitright is for that very reason, because we need them to know those rules. The I before E except after C. I know it doesn't work every time, but it certainly is a useful one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a little look at these individual sentences, and then we'll just talk about how a child is going to identify that it's spelt incorrectly. One of the things we know, children are reluctant to actually choose an N. They feel there has to be a mistake there. So it's very much trusting and having the confidence to select it if they feel every word is spelt correctly. So if we look at 29, and sorry, one other strategy here, which is really important, children must read the sentence. And the reason they must read it is to identify things like homophones. So we all know what a homophone is. We talked about that right at the beginning. It's a word that sounds the same, but has a different spelling and a different meaning. So just an example there, sure and sure. Now you might see, for example, that sure in the sentence. You go, oh yeah, it's spelled correctly, just scanning it. But actually they've used the wrong sure. So actually that has to be identified as a spelling mistake. Okay. If they don't read it, they're not going to see it. They're just going to be scanning the words saying, oh, that's spelt right, that's spelt right. It's all about words being correct within the context of what they're doing. So let's have a little look at number 29. The local county's superior players dominated the tennis tournament. These, again, often do catch children out a little bit. So the answer is D, because there's actually a missing U there for tournament. I remember one year a child coming out of the exam and explaining that the word 40 had been put in, and spelt like that. But of course, when you spell 40, you don't have the U. And they really found that really hard to get their head around. Because, like, why not? Why is the U not used? It would make more sense. But that's, I'm afraid, part of learning these spellings and getting your head around those slightly unusual words. So tournament there needs the U. So what you would do on the multiple choice sheet is you would select D because that's where the spelling mistake falls. Okay, so the reason it's sectioned up into the sentences is to indicate where the spelling mistake is. I received an elaborate invitation to an exclusive party next week. The answer to this one is A, because it should be EI. And if you think about the rule, I before E, except after C, then hopefully a child would spot that that spelt received is spelt incorrectly there. Number 31, we've got pursued, needs to be a U rather than PE. So the telephone company pursued the customers that did not pay. Number 32, Ollie asked his mum for permission to attend the charity concert. And again, if you look carefully there, you'll see that permission, if a child knows how to spell mission, they'll realise that it contains two S's. And within the spelling section, there's likely to be about seven, probably not a lot more, 7 questions that they need to answer. I'll just won't do all of these, but there is a reason why I've also included these 2 words, necessary and committee, because from the feedback we get, those words do tend to come up. Now we can't predict every year what words will be there, but again, children have said, "Oh yeah, committee was there," remembering how many M's, how many T's, how many E's, and necessary, how many C's and how many S's, do seem like very common words to try and pick out. So Yulia regretted postponing her annual expedition to Norway. There's nothing wrong with that, so they would select an N. And that again is them trusting they know how to spell the words. Compulsory is wrong there because it needs an O rather than E. Playful, that's a very typical thing to do with Full. Things like wonderful and careful. They love playing that trick on the children a little bit. Climbing needs a B. That's the answer to that one. And the last one here that I'll look at with you is consistent. Needs an E rather than an A. We do provide at Teachitright a commonly misspelt word list. Please let our office know if you haven't received it. It was part of your pack when you joined Teachitright, but if you can't find it, it's also on the student portal. But it's a lovely list of what they call Key Stage 2 commonly misspelt words. And I think if your child could know all of those words, they will stand a brilliant chance of doing really well in this section. We know they can't learn every word. It's just not going to be possible. But if they can certainly learn some of the most commonly misspelt ones and learn some of those mnemonics as well that help you. I don't know why, but it always seems to me words like things like rhythm. Like how would I learn how to spell rhythm? So rhythm helps your 2 hips move. I remember my teacher teaching me that. I've not forgotten it. So again, if you can find a fun way, and it sort of goes back to, I know one of the parents asked right at the beginning about if you're not an English native speaker, how is my child going to learn these things? And it is little tricks like that, little mnemonics, little, groups of words together that have a similar pattern. I think that's probably the key thing, isn't it, Lou, with spellings?
Yes, I was just thinking as you were talking, I teach my children at least 6 different strategies to be a good speller because we all have favourite strategies, whether we know them or not, but we have strategies. So for something like committee, I would break it into com, mit, t, because you're actually saying both of the M's and both of the T's. So you don't, but the other one that a lot of people don't use as much as they could is the shape of the word. That every word has its own shape. Some of them are unique and some of them are not. But if you draw around a word, could you draw, say, round committee? Could you just draw around it, like as if it was in its own shaped box? No, you've got to go, that's it, yeah. And then up at over the T's, around and down. And then if you had obviously a tail letter, it would come down. So it's got its own shape. Now, when we're doing the 11 plus, we're actually looking at the shapes of the words. So it's a strategy that's really, really important when children can just look and say, I don't know how that's wrong, but I know it's wrong. And in this sort of spelling test, they don't have to say how it's wrong. They just have to know it's wrong. So that strategy is really, really important. So when you're learning spellings, something like rhythm, if you draw around that, it's got a very particular shape. And if you've got double letters and you write it without a double letters, your brain will just look at it and think, that's wrong. It's not long enough. So it's a really important strategy for this way of testing is to look at the shape of the word. You've probably had that experience yourself where you just look at a word and think, I know that's wrong. I'll have to write it with two M's and one M's and one M, and then I'll know which one's the right one. That's because your brain has been looking at the shape without you telling it to, which is quite amazing. And yes, shy words hiding in words.
Excellent. I
Children
did just write that down because
absolutely
I know
love
you
that.
enjoy doing that with the
Yeah.
children as well, and actually just giving them those spelling rules, but giving them strategies. That's really what it's all about. And I know you're wonderful at doing that with the students. Right. Punctuation, Lou. So I don't know if you want to just talk about
Yes, I'd like to talk
punctuation marks a
about
little
which
bit, and
punctuation
yeah,
marks the
yeah,
11 plus test for.
yeah, sure.
So, first of all, I always give them a list of the punctuation marks that they're going to be tested for in order of difficulty. So when you look at your sentence, they're not given in sentences for the punctuation because it's a whole text. So if you could just go to the text for a minute, Chris, that would be helpful. So the whole thing blends into one piece of writing so that they can test lots and lots of different punctuation marks. So I would always advise reading it through first so that you get a sense of what the whole thing is saying. When you check, you've got to check for punctuation marks that are not there and should be, but also punctuation marks that should be there and are not. Now, hopefully, the children will see some of them straight away and say, oh, yes, that's a mistake. Oh, yes, that's a mistake. But what do they do when they get stuck? Well, the list I give them of all the different punctuation marks that they will be tested on, I give them in a list of difficulty so that when they're checking, they can check each one off but not waste too much time. So here is the list that I do. I give them A for capital letters. So the first thing you check for is capital letters. Is one missing or is one there that shouldn't be there? The next one, full stop. Easily missed to not realise there should be a full stop. So check for a full stop. The next one, exclamation mark. They're very keen on putting exclamation marks when there should be a question mark and vice versa, so that you think, oh, yeah, that's all right, that's there. But actually, it's the other one that should be there. So the next one is question mark. The next one is speech marks or quotation marks. Sometimes they quote the name of a book or a play or something. The next one is brackets. So I give them check for two brackets. Sometimes they'll give the first bracket and not the second one. The children will miss that one. Commas for parentheses. So two commas, which are just commas for parentheses. Just two commas, Chris. You're only checking for parentheses, which is when they're doing the same job as brackets could do. The next one is apostrophes. Apostrophes for plural and apostrophes for possession. The final three, which are the more difficult ones, are colons, semicolons, and
Lou,
the
sorry, can
last,
I just mention also, of course, with apostrophes,
yeah,
also, and it's such a common thing, isn't it? Contractions.
yes, but sorry, I meant
Um,
plurals, possession, and protraction.
yeah, it's often, I just know how many
Yeah,
times that comes up in a paper.
and that's why it's difficult because there's three
Yeah,
things that it's using.
exactly.
Then colon, semicolon, and the last of all, comma. And the reason I put comma last is so many children just eliminate a comma that should be there or put in a comma because they can't think of anything else. And there's about 8 rules that they might test on for commas in the 11 plus, so they need to know those rules. And it's really difficult if they go straight for the commas right at the beginning because they often miss an easy question, which is a full stop, because they're worried about commas. So I always say leave those to last. The only other one is ellipses, and they love ellipsis, but I've not often seen those tested. But if they are there should only be 3. So those are the question marks, and I would advise them to just jot those down. So when they get stuck, they just go along and say, is it that? Is it that? Is it that? Is it that? Starting with the easiest to the hardest. So let's have a look at what we've got. So we've got mentioned the word hippo, and you will probably think of a cute but robust animal. But how accurate is this? Now you can see I've had to move on from the end of that line to know whether a full stop was required or not, because the sentence might have continued. But the answer is D, because it misses a full stop. Next one. But how accurate is this? Now, hopefully I'm reading with good expression, and I will notice that it needs a question mark because I put that in my voice. Next one. Hippos look like they have tough skin when in fact their skin is highly sensitive and susceptible to burn in the sun. Hippo sweat even has special properties. And again, I've just moved on to make sure there's nothing coming up that might affect the line I'm on, but that's an N. And then I go back again to the beginning of the sentence. Hippo sweat even has special properties to protect the skin from the sun's harmful rays. I've immediately spotted that it's C because it needs an apostrophe. Possession. Going back again, the same fluid, red in colour, also moisturizes and serves as an antibiotic. Imagine using hippo sweat as a cosmetic. And again, I'm just going to go back and look at that again because I'm not quite sure. So can I go back to 41, Chris, please?
Yeah, cool.
The same fluid, red in colour, we go back up again. The same fluid, red in colour, also moisturizes. It needs a comma after colour. And I might have missed that. Probably when the whole page was on, it would have been okay. But you need to keep, you can see how you keep need to going back and forward to be reading the sentences. So 42. Imagine using hippo sweat as a cosmetic or a medicine. I think I'd be wondering about a question mark there, but it's true that hippos are omnivores. So I might have been distracted by that exclamation mark and missed that it's is a contraction of it is. It's true that hippos are omnivores, but don't let yourself be fooled. They are not gentle creatures and can be quite dangerous, especially given the speed. Right, so I think that needs a full stop or even a colon in that line. So, but don't let yourself be fooled. They are not gentle creatures and can be quite dangerous, especially given the speed they can run. So I would have put either a full stop or a colon after after fooled. They can, especially given the speed they can run, up to 30 kilometers per hour. Can you see you've got half a bracket, not the other half? So there's your bracket. And then finally, hippos typically do their running at night whilst hunting for food. During the day, they stay in the water. I think Comma is needed because there's a fronted adverbial clause. So that no, I think it's during the day, comma, they stay in water. I got quite distracted by that and thought that it might need the comma rid of, but actually because it's a fronted adverbial clause, it needs to be there. Hippos typically do their running at night whilst hunting for food. No, I wouldn't put a comma there, I don't think, Chris. I think that's an N.
Oh, okay. I
Sorry, I was
didn't.
distracting you by talking about the
No,
other.
that's all right. That's okay. Yeah, because you've got your during the day. That's got to be a comma after that, hasn't
But
there?
you can see why that's so difficult because they've got to keep going backwards to the line they've just read and then forwards to the one that's coming up because they're not going to give them all sentences that end at the end of the line. It's quite tricky.
Thanks, Lou. And I think that sort of brings us to the point about the ends that we had within those 7 or 8 questions there. Actually, sorry, no, there's more than that. 9 questions altogether, 2 ends,
Yeah.
which seems, from a child's perspective, should seem about right.
And I've noticed a lot of the ends are to do with commas because there's so many things they can test on in commas that
Yeah.
they will use commas to distract you, as it did to me then.
Lou, fantastic. Thank you very much. I think the other thing to say about punctuation, just to emphasize where you can go to get a bit more support, is that BBC Bite Size website. Wonderful little clips about how to use apostrophe, semicolons. Certainly recommend you go and have a look at that. I think that's a really good way of revising as well. And like Lou mentioned earlier, maybe just taking one punctuation mark a day,
Yeah.
sort of mastering it, being confident with it, and moving on. We do find that certainly at school, children are not always taught the functions of the punctuation. There's sort of an assumption they know. No, they need to be taught. They need to know when to use an apostrophe, when to use, as Lou was saying, the rules for commas and things. So please don't just assume because they may have said, oh, yeah, we did punctuation at school, they know all the functions and the rules. The 11 plus tests that, so that is something they've got to have a good grasp of. We printed out a sheet recently, or Suzanne Perrett prepared it for us, which was a wonderful sheet on all the different punctuation marks and how they can be used. Please look out for that. It is on the student portal. We've given them out within block 4. The children will have had them. But if you can't find it, we're all happy to email it to you. But the children should have it in their bags. We printed out copies for every child in year 5. Actually, we did it for year 4 as well because we did feel that year 4 children, why not? Learn it now, ready for when they get round to year 5. But certainly for year 5, make sure they have that sheet. Right. We are sort of creeping towards the end, aren't we, Lou? But we want to just talk a little bit about grammar, I think, just in terms of how it's presented to the pupils and what that looks like. We've just got a couple of examples, haven't we, there?
Yes, I think the children often do well in this section, but I think it is difficult for some children because often the way we speak is not correct grammar. And that can be an issue. So, for example, my favourite one is they often put in, he should have. The children will say, I should have done this. I know I should have done that. And it isn't should have, it should have. And that's where reading comes in, because if they read in a book, they will see should have. But day-to-day speech, I rarely hear people say should have. They often say should have. And those are the sort of tricks that they put in grammar. So you do have to be careful. Again, also, I get the children to skim through the whole text first with this and just put the word blank where the choice is. So I get them to go, waiting in the wings, the students' nerves soared as they listened to the blank whispers from the audience. All of blank friends and family had come to see them perform in the end of the year show. But what they were about to see was not what you blank a normal show. And I think that's really important because they need the expression, they need the whole thing to see what's going on and therefore know what is appropriate. And then go back and try it again. Waiting in the wings, the students' nerves soared as they listened to the something whispers. And just try it. Excitement whispers. No, it doesn't work like that. Excite whispers. No, eliminate. Exciting whispers. At this point, I might think possible, but listen to the excited whispers from the audience. Sounds much better, and excites whispers doesn't work. Now, a lot of children can just scan those 5 and pick out the right one, but I would advise them, if they've got time, to go back and read the whole sentence just to check, because things like exciting and excited there can be quite difficult. All of, we've got there, those, and them. Eliminate straight away all of them friends, all of those friends, do that one, and which there is it. Well, their be is short for they are, and that doesn't work. All of they are friends and families. There is over there, and you're left with their see. But what they were about to see was not what you blank a normal show, not what you considered, wrong tense. That was not what you would consider a normal show. That sounds all right to me. Are considering a normal show? No. Was not what you considering a normal show? That doesn't work. Or was not what you wouldn't consider a normal show? Doesn't work in the context of the whole sentence. So back to should consider. So again, it's seeing the whole thing and check. I do think it's important to go back with that one and check. Sometimes it's not individual sentences, is it, Chris? It's a whole text again.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think it tends to be as well that they'll, like you say, intertwine those sentences so it sort of flows as one passage, which probably helps the children more, I would say, because it's all in the same
yes
tense, etc. Right. What we're going to move on to now is something that Lou and I do together. This often, Conrad, can you not draw on the screen, please? If I could ask you just to not do that for the moment, because we've got various things we want to be able to see, but I know it's tempting, isn't it? Right. So what would you like to do, Lou? Shall I read the question, you respond?
Yes.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yes,
So, guys, these are a couple of questions that have been asked by parents in the past, and we've sort of just collated them together. Some of them, I'm pretty sure, very much are common sense, but we thought we would just go through these with you. So I'll read the question, and Lou will be the responder. So, there are words in the passage, and we've heard children say this before, I don't understand.
And I think I've said this already, that they will put some horrifically hard words in that I might even struggle to remember what they mean. And they do it to make you panic. Unfortunately, it's almost a game. I've got a room of clever children and I've got to sort some clever children for some clever children. So I'll put a few tricks in. And if the children panic, it makes it worse. So the first thing I always say is don't panic. You may not need to know that word to answer the questions. There won't be a question about it. But if you can go to the context, look what's happening around that word. And that's why it's important to have a sense of the whole text in your head so that you can guess what word might be appropriate. Use elimination, as we talked a lot about. Look at what you know about the words. I think there was an occasion when I said it was two forms of the same word. It might be an adverb turned into a verb or whatever. But does that help you? And prefix and suffixes also might help you. But take your best sensible head with you, eliminate, and then have a guess with what you have left.
I don't have any idea what one part of the passage means.
Well, I think we have said you only have time to read the text once, but you do have time to read bits of the text more than once. So if you're reading, I think we have had some texts in the past. There's one about America in the book that we used last block, about the President of America, and it was very historical. And there was a paragraph that was really difficult. And we had that problem. So what we realised is it's okay. You have got time to go back and read a paragraph again. Slow down your reading. And it says here, always have a go, even if you're not sure. Read it several times, spot the key words and ideas, and try to imagine what's going on. It's better to guess and put something rather than leave a blank. But the lesson is, do look at it again and use the punctuation. Make sure you're using the punctuation and getting the right expression.
I can't find the answer to the question anywhere.
So, reading between the lines. To answer some questions, you will need to read between the lines. This, of course, is inference. You've got to form your own opinion, but you've got to find something that gives you reason for that opinion. So, why have I chosen to take that opinion? What's my evidence?
How am I expected to remember the whole passage?
And absolutely, you're not. As it says, comprehension isn't a memory text. Even if the questions are on a different page or a different sheet, you must always use the text to help you find the answer, even if you think you can remember it. And I think this is a very important skill when you're doing comprehension, to make sure that you get done those questions that you're pretty confident about. And then once you've done that, you can go back and have another look at the ones you're not. The problem with that is you have got to make sure that you're very, very carefully putting the right answer into the right number of question. So sometimes it's best to put an answer, but on your question paper, put a little star and think, I might go back and look at that. But always look at the text. Remember that the answer is in the text. But I think for doing that picture, I hope when you did the Huckleberry Finn one that you had a go at doing what I said, making it almost like a cinema, in if it's fiction, in your mind, so that you're seeing what happens. You can also almost see the dog in the distance howling back and those sorts of things. And that gives you a lot of things to look back on, as well as just the words. The pictures in your mind will help.
Lou, thank you very much. There has actually been another question in the chat, which I just like to give you if I can. The question says, "What about going back to the grammar that we were talking about, in terms of spotting the word type in sentences, e.g., relative pronouns, modal verbs?
They
How
don't
many of
appear.
Yeah, I was going to say." The question then asks, how many of these types of questions would you expect in the exam? And are Teachitright teaching the definitions of these in the lessons? It's not something we've really seen, is it?
No,
No.
it just doesn't come up in the 11 plus. They're
Yeah.
not, it's not the sort of thing they're not looking for somebody who can learn lots of rules.
No.
They're looking for somebody who can read a text and extract information, I
Yeah.
think.
And even
That,
with that grammar section, it's
yeah,
not something that we see really, is it, within
no.
the, well, examples or familiarization booklets or anything like that. I hope that answers your question on that. Um, One of the things that we, I guess, want to put across and emphasize again is the importance of doing as much reading as you can. And I know I've got children who uh, sometimes can be a little bit reluctant to read, and it's how we can try and inspire them to get into good reading habits. I don't think I'll necessarily read all of these, but there's just a list here of some things that you can do, things that I've used with my own children, and I'm sure Lou would echo some of these around sort of using story tapes,
Yes.
different types of text, getting them into something that they really are interested in, whether that's wildlife or whether that's science fiction or whatever it might be, that they're sporty, so you could buy them a book about that sport. I bought my son recently an autobiography because he's very much into goalkeeping, and actually he read the autobiography and absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. But I think it was very much because he is interested in that particular sport. So I'm sure, again, I don't want to be preaching to you. I'm sure these are things you've thought about before, but if your child isn't reading, please try and find a way to get that as part of their daily habits if you can. Anything to mention on those, Lou?
One thing that's just come to me, something I always say to my children is, I always say, remember, you've got to fake it to make it. In that, when you open your paper or your book and you're faced with a comprehension and you read the title, I once opened one and it was about Braille, Louis Braille. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm not at all interested in this. This is going to be so boring. And when I read it, I discovered in the reading of the text that when you go into a lift, the little silver bit there's a little silver plaque by the buttons that you press in the lift with little bumps on them. Now, I'm probably talking to the people who know this, but I never knew that those are braille, so that people who go in the lift can feel for the right lift. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. That's a good, interesting piece of information. And what I learned from that was that if I go into a text with an attitude of, oh, this is going to be boring, I'm not interested in this, I don't like this, I won't do that listening that I said. I will read it, but I won't listen. So I say to the children, whatever is in front of you, just for those 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes that you're doing the text, you've got to summon up to some enthusiasm to think, I really want to read this text. I'm going to find something that's interesting. I'm going to find something that's enjoyable. I'm going to love it. And sort of take that attitude in, because if you go in with the attitude, oh, this is boring, you, even as an adult, you just won't listen to it. We've all had that experience, but children need to be sort of told these things because it does make a huge difference. So we have a little joke sometimes before, are you ready to fake it? And off we go. But it's really important. And I
Fake it,
do
you'll
think,
make it, I think is what you often say, Lou, isn't
yes,
it?
definitely.
Thanks, Lou. There, we will send out these slides, as I said earlier. Thank you so much for coming along this evening. We've had a wonderful attendance. I think we got up to over 40 at one point in time, and maybe some people had a little bit of problem with their connection. But thank you very much for giving up your time. I hope you found this useful. There are some questions within the chat which we will capture and do our best to try and answer, and whether that's directly to you or within a sort of a PDF. But hopefully you feel we've certainly covered off a huge amount within English. We will be focusing, as I say, on creative writing. We've got exam technique, we've got critical thinking, which we're going to try and cover off. And thank you very much. Don't worry if you were someone apologising for drawing on the screen. Don't worry, certainly only just towards the end. I think your concentration levels have been very good, particularly if you're a child who's been sitting through this. So thank you very much for your time. And Louise, thank you very much for your time as well. We look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.